Good afternoon. I'm Kay Jacobson, the History and Current Events Coordinator for Ramsey County Library's online programming, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the popular ongoing presidential series created by J.B. Anderson. We are currently in the midst of learning about Abraham Lincoln. This is part one, session three, and J.B. is someone who's been a lifelong historian, worked for the University of Minnesota for 25 years. He's someone who loves to just share his knowledge. And today's program is brought to you not just by Ramsey County Libraries, but by Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. It is my pleasure to turn things over to JB. Let him get on screen there. Hi, JB. And I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you. Okay. Last week, I talked about a couple of Lincoln romances. We're going to go through those very quickly here, and then I'll do the final one that we didn't get to. First was Anne Rutledge, pictured here, died at age 22, and some say there never was such a romance. It occurred in New Salem, Illinois. After her death, there was considerations of suicide by Lincoln, according to many, and he wrote this very lengthy poem about suicide. Joshua Speed, a friend of his, commented. Mary Owens was next romance of Lincoln's. Here's a letter that he sent to her asking, are we still going to be seeing each other after there had been a kind of a lengthy pause in their romance, and she never did write back to him. And now Mary Todd, we did not cover last week. This is a picture of who would become Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln. And this romance began about 2 years after the Mary Owens relationship had ended. And he met Mary Todd because she was in the area visiting a sister in Illinois. She was from Kentucky. So she had come to the Springfield, Illinois area. And there were parties, of course, and that's how they met, come and meet my sister who's here from Kentucky. They dated for 2 years, decided to marry, and then Lincoln backed out of the proposal. 18 months later, they agreed to, or they were married then again. They had agreed to that some months earlier. So it was a kind of a rocky relationship. Anytime Lincoln would introduce Mary Todd, he would say, "This is Mary Todd. Her last name has 2 D's. Unlike God, who only gets 1 D. Here's a chronology of Lincoln's relationships with women in Illinois. Anne Rutledge, who died while they were romancing. Then he dated Mary Owens for some time, and that relationship ended 1837. Meets Mary Todd in 1839. 41, he proposes and backs out. 42, they get married. Marriage, family, and progeny. So we're going to talk about Lincoln's marriage and his descendants, which is what that word progeny means. I had a student once who, every time I would talk about president's children, he'd say, they're the spawn. Well, here's a picture of that possibility. Marriage, family, progeny. There were 4 sons that the Lincoln, Mary Todd, and Abraham had together. The first oldest son was Robert Todd Lincoln, pictured here, who lived from 1843 to 1926. That's 83 years. Died of a cerebral hemorrhage. And he became president of the Pullman Railroad Company. So the Pullman cars, the ones that had sleeping cars, that's based what Pullman cars were first called, were sleeping cars. And he was the only of Lincoln's four sons that lived to adulthood. This is Eddie Baker Lincoln. Edward was his first name. He died at the age of 3 years from tuberculosis. All of the Lincoln children now, photography had been invented, and in the late 1830s. So we have photographs of these children as a result. This is William Wallace Lincoln. Lived 1850 to 1862. He was 11 years old when he died of a raging fever. William Wallace was a famous Scottish leader in the early 1200s, trying to gain independence from Britain. He was captured by the British, brutally murdered, hung, drawn, and quartered. Very horrible kind of thing. They hang you till you're almost dead, you're almost choked to death. Then they remove your intestines, that's the drawn part. Then they tie your arms and legs to 4 horses and have the horses gallop away. A very ugly death. And that's how William Wallace died. There's a lot of controversy. Did the British capture him, and or was he led into a position to be captured by Robert Bruce, who was the King of Scotland and was worried about William Wallace's popularity? A branch of my family came to the United States in 1738 from Scotland. I had a great uncle named Robert Bruce Christie and another great uncle named William Wallace Christie. Excuse me. So famous leader, died in the White House. This child did. There was a party that Lincoln attended. His wife remained upstairs with Willie, and he died during that White House party. This is Thomas Lincoln, nicknamed Tad. Lived from 1853 to 1871. He was 18 years old when he died. So he died 6 years after his father's assassination, and he had heart failure. Lincoln thought that when he was first born, he said, "Boy, it looks like a tadpole." And that's how he got that nickname, Tad. So he wasn't called Tom, he was called Tad during his lifetime. There are 3 grandchildren, excuse me, that Abraham Lincoln had, all of them, of course, from the firstborn son, Robert Todd Lincoln. So Robert Todd Lincoln's 3 children. This is Abraham Lincoln II, but he went by the name of Jack. And again, an early death, 1873 to 1890, 16 years of age. These early deaths were not unusual. In the 1800s, by the age of 10, half of all children had died. That was not uncommon. My grandfather was born in 1878, my paternal grandfather, in Denmark. He came to the United, there were 11 children in the family. 5 of them were dead by the time my grandfather reached 23 years of age. So not an unusual situation. Five remaining came to the United States. The 11th and youngest stayed in Denmark. So these early deaths that we see are not unusual at the time. There was one vaccine for smallpox, basically, and pretty soon people began to identify germs and what germs caused what diseases, and then vaccines developed, and children started living. Now today, it's a great tragedy if any child dies, but it was relatively common in Lincoln and Lincoln ancestor days. So Abraham Jack Lincoln, he died in London, and it was 6 days after he had some surgery that was a carbuncle that he had removed from under his arm. And again, he was 16 years old. A carbuncle is a Staphylococcus infection. Second child of Robert Todd Lincoln is Mary, who went by the nickname of Mamie Todd Lincoln. She married a man named Isham. Excuse me. 1869 to 1938, she lived to be 69 years of age. Picture on the left is as a teenager, young woman, and middle-aged with the photo on the right side. Third child of Robert Todd Lincoln was Jessie Harlan Lincoln, and her name was Beckwith after she had married. I got that nay in there wrong. Her maiden name was Lincoln. That's where the nay should be. Sorry about that. She lived 1875 to 1948. Some of you listening to this lecture probably could have interviewed her. You might have been 20 years old or 14 years old, something. Anyhow, she lived to be 72 years old. There's a photo of her in a common fluffy dress of the day. So Robert Todd Lincoln, 3 children. Here's a picture of the 3 of them together. They're grandchildren of Abraham Lincoln. And again, they are Abraham Lincoln II, Mary Lincoln, and Jessie Lincoln. Jessie Lincoln married 3 times, and at her death in the 1940s, she weighed 400 pounds. So did a healthy amount of weight gaining. There are 3 great-grandchildren also. Jessie Harlan Lincoln Beckwith had 2 children. Married name was Beckwith. Mary Lincoln Beckwith, who went by the nickname of Peggy, lived from 1898 to 1975, total of 76 years. She's pictured here. She never married, had no children, and evidence has shown that she was indeed a lesbian. So she had a lifetime partner, but was not a male. Robert Todd Lincoln Beckwith, pictured here, lived from 1904 to 1985, died at the age of 81 years. He married 3 times, but had no children by any of the 3 wives. He is the last surviving direct descendant of Abraham Lincoln. His second wife had a child in 1968, but he had had a vasectomy in 1960, so the paternity is discounted. It was someone else's son, not his. Mary Mamie Lincoln had 1 child, a son, Lincoln Isham. He married but had no children. And this is Lincoln Isham here, and that's her 1 son. So for some reason, there were just these gentlemen were not having children. Great-grandson to Abraham Lincoln, pictured here, Lincoln Isham, 1892 to 1971. Again, married, no children. Different photo. Marriage, family, and progeny. Lincoln's children, we're going to tell some personal stories. First, Robert Todd Lincoln. This is an amazing tale. Robert Todd Lincoln's life was saved, and he wrote an article about it that appeared in this magazine, the Century Illustrated Monthly Magazine, and it was published from 1881 to 1930. The incident occurred while a group of passengers were late at night purchasing their sleeping car places from the conductor, who stood on the station platform at the entrance of a car. Platform was about the height of the car floor, and there was, of course, a narrow space between the platform and the car body. So you got a train sitting here like this, and a platform, and there's a space in between them. And there was a good bit of crowding. And I happened to be pressed by against the train, so he's kind of standing over the gap between the platform and the train, and the train began to move, and the motion twisted him off his feet, and he dropped between the platform and the car that had moved forward a bit into that open space. He was pretty helpless, trapped there. Somebody grabbed him by the coat collar, vigorously seized him, pulled him up. He was able to secure his footing on the platform again. It was Edwin Booth, the famous actor who had saved his life, and the brother to John Wilkes Booth, who would eventually kill Lincoln's father. Upon turning to thank my rescuer, I saw it was Edwin Booth, whose face was, of course, well known to me. I expressed my gratitude to him, and in so doing, called him by name. He was a famous actor, as was his brother, John Wilkes Booth. Amazing. Roughly 1 to 2 years later, after this incident occurred, in the middle of the Civil War, John Wilkes Booth would assassinate Robert Lincoln's father. This is the Booth Theater in New York City. It's named for Edwin Booth, built in 1913, still in existence. I have gone to over 40 Broadway plays, but I never did get to see one in this theater. Consequently, I never was inside it, but I did walk past it. And you can see here Booth Theater, and here is a sign, lighted sign about Booth. I've got close-ups of that so you can see the Booth Theater. Personal stories, Edward Baker Lincoln. He was born in Springfield, Illinois, died at the age of 3 years and 11 months, so he was almost 4 years old. And again, the cause of death was tuberculosis, but some people thought he had diphtheria. There was lots of conflicting information. Diseases were defined, but often confused and so forth. He probably died of medullary thyroid cancer, and that's a part of the multiple endocrine neoplasia type 2. That's an alternative disease to Abraham Lincoln's Marfan syndrome. Remember, we talked about Marfan syndrome and all of its symptoms and how Lincoln fits that category of having Marfan syndrome. Well, there are some people who think he may have had this multiple endocrine neoplasia type 2, which is known, here you can see, as MEN. That's the initials. Type 2 A and B. And it's a thyroid and adrenal gland disease. It's a wasting away disease, similar to tuberculosis, which is a wasting away disease, except it is a genetic disorder. And it certainly came from Lincoln's side of the family, if that's what the disease was that the boy had. Abraham and Mary Lincoln wrote a poem about Eddie when he died. And excuse me, those midnight stars are sadly dimmed, that late so brilliantly shone, and the crimson tinge from cheek and lip with the heart's warm life has flown. And it's a lengthy poem, very, very well done. First and third verses, or second and fourth verses rhyme. And you can see it goes 4 lines, 2 lines, 4 lines, 2 lines is the structure of the poem. Want a copy of it? Feel free to write to me and I will send it to you. Lincoln's children, let's do William Wallace Lincoln. Named for the late, or named for the 1200s AD Scottish hero. And it was an in-law that cared for this boy at the time of his death, and his name was Dr. William Wallace. Slight diversion. Again, I've already mentioned this. My maternal grandmother's family came to the U.S. from Scotland in 1738. Members of the Christie clan, gorgeous tartan, got some blue in it, and blue and reds. And these guys were great uncles to me, William Wallace Christie and Robert Bruce Christie. I knew their children, who were uncles and aunts to me. And that's a pretty early date coming to the U.S. However, this same family line through my maternal grandmother were among the Brown family, John Brown, who was a carpenter who arrived on the Mayflower. It was assumed at the time of his death that Eddie had died of typhoid fever. There were these diseases running rampant among children during this period of time. His younger brother, Tad, had the same symptoms. Today, it's assumed that they may have had this MEN type 2 disease and died very young of it. Thomas Lincoln. Here's a picture of Thomas in a Civil War uniform. That's a photograph, not a painting. Something was wrong or difficult about this child from the very beginning. Had a large head at birth. And that's when Lincoln said he looks like a tadpole because he had this unusually enlarged head. And again, that's the origin of the name Tad. He was named for his grandfather, Thomas Lincoln, pictured here, Lincoln's father. He had died in 1851. He was hyperactive, and they never did send him off to school. He was tutored, but tutors all quit. They were very frustrated with his inability to learn. At the age of 12, he was still unable to read. So something went haywire, and we don't know exactly what. On the night of the assassination, Tad was at Grover's Theater. Here's a drawing of that theater. They did children's plays occasionally, and they were doing one the evening of his father's assassination. The show was stopped, and the Lincoln shooting was announced. So there's the son in the audience. Tad Lincoln began running up and down the aisle screaming. Corporal James Tanner, who had been a wounded Union soldier, lost both his legs below the knee, wrote the following on the next page there about the Grover Theater announcement having occurred. This gentleman, now I'm looking at the photo of him, he lived from 1844 to 1927. And he wrote, while sitting there witnessing the play about 10 o'clock, or rather a little after, the entrance door was thrown open and a man exclaimed, "President Lincoln is assassinated in his private box at Ford's." Instantly, all was excitement, and a terrible rush commenced, and someone cried out, "Sit down, it's a ruse of the pickpockets. They're going to try to steal from us." The audience generally agreed to this. For the most of them just sat down again. The play went on. Soon, however, a gentleman came out from behind the scenes, interrupted the play, and informed us that the sad news was too true. We instantly dispersed. Tad was 12 years old at the time of the assassination, and in 1868, 3 years after the assassination, he had moved to Europe with his mother. She spent a great deal of time in Europe. This is the ship that they went to Europe on. It's a picture of it from 1932. So at the time that this picture was taken, it was over 60 years old. It's the city of Baltimore is the ship. Marriage, family, progeny, the four children's burials. This is the Lincoln Memorial that was built in Springfield, Illinois. And the three youngest sons, Robert Todd Lincoln is not buried here, the oldest surviving son, but the three youngest sons are buried here. Here is Mrs. Lincoln is buried here, and here you can see Edward, William Lincoln, and that one I can't make out, but it's the other son. So they are buried in Springfield, Illinois. The Robert Todd Lincoln family, he lived to be 83 years old. are all buried in Arlington National Cemetery. And this is the tomb of Robert Todd Lincoln that you see here. Here is his name etched in the stone up there. Lincoln becomes an attorney. There were no law courses in college. Generally, attorneys were licensed because they had worked under another attorney. This was the common practice. So you'd find somebody and you'd find an attorney and say, I want to be an attorney too. And that practicing attorney would say, okay, you need to pay me, $1 a month and you can work here under me. And then you'll become licensed after a couple of years or so. Abraham Lincoln did neither of these options. There were no law courses, there were apprenticeships. What did he do? Well, he read law books. He'd been a he'd been a great reader in his childhood. We talked about the books that his stepmother had last week, and so he studied under himself. And that started in 1836. He was 27 years old, had this desire, was able to gain access to books and prove himself to be knowledgeable about the law, and gained a license as a result. He moved to Springfield, Illinois then from New Salem, bigger town just a few miles away. And his first law partner was this gentleman, John Todd Stewart, who was a cousin to Mary, who would become Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln. Partnership was dissolved. They remained friends over the years. Stewart did not support Lincoln for the presidency in 1860. He supported the Democratic nominee. He was elected to Congress himself, fought against going to war with the South over slavery and secession. So he fought against Lincoln's war efforts, and he fought against the emancipation of slaves when Lincoln did that on January 1st of 1863. But again, they remained friends. Stephen Logan, Lincoln, 1841 Lincoln partner, pictured here in the upper image, and in the lower image adjacent to Lincoln. He brought his son into the partnership, and when that occurred, Lincoln quit this partnership with Logan. After the Lincoln assassination, Stewart became the director of the Lincoln Memorial Association of Illinois, interestingly enough. Again, Stewart was the previous partner. Lincoln's third and most famous law partner is this gentleman, William Herndon. Their partnership began in 1844. The law office they practiced in at Springfield, Illinois, is now a historic site. Lincoln would bring his children to work at the law office, and he didn't look after them very well, and this was very disturbing to Herndon. Herndon never talked to Lincoln about it. He never said, hey, rein these kids in, will you? Never happened. But he wrote about it after Lincoln's death. Herndon's Lincoln, and this is a book that was written by William Herndon, pictured here in the small image on the left. And he talks in this book about how Lincoln's children were very poorly behaved and not looked after. Lincoln's wealth. Springfield Marine and Fire Insurance Company. This is pretty startling. 1853 to 1861, that's a period of 8 years. Lincoln billed the Springfield Marine and Fire Insurance Company for $17,218.59. That's an average of $2,152.32 per year. Here is a check blank, Springfield Marine and Fire Insurance Company. Lincoln received these numerous checks from this company. Now, 1853 to 1861, $2,150 per year. In 2024 dollars by inflation, that's $87,500 a year. This guy had a bundle of money. The 8-year total would be over $700,000, and that's just from one client. He did business with several insurance companies and with several railroad companies. Mostly he was proving that these railroad companies owned the right-of-way where they were building, and they were building across small farmers' land. So the small farmers would say, hey, we're going to sue, or we deserve payment, and Lincoln would defend the railroad company then. The individual farmers almost never won. They lost about 2/3 of the time. Lincoln was a corporate attorney. He generally proved for the railroads that they owned a right-of-way, that it was free to them, and that they could build on small farmers' lands. Estimates of his annual average income from 1844 to 1860 run at about $100,000 per year. That's about $4.1 million in 2024 by inflation. So a healthy sum of money. Clinical depression. Both of the Lincolns suffered from this, and we're going to talk about it for a few minutes here. They both had symptoms that in their day was called melancholia throughout most of the 1800s. The deaths of 2 sons were a major factor in these feelings of depression for Abraham Lincoln. For Mary, the deaths of 3 sons and her husband were the leading cause of the depression that she was feeling. Lincoln showed signs of depression before he had sons, even early on as a young man. This seems to be a trait that he had early in life, and the deaths of the 2 sons before Lincoln's own death were very difficult for him to deal with. Mary Todd Lincoln in 1875 AD, her son Robert, the only surviving son, had her committed to an asylum due to this depression or melancholia. This is Bellevue Place in Batavia, Illinois. It's a suburb of Chicago, and because of her 4-month residence here, it is today a Lincoln Museum, or it's a museum to her. Her commitment here, forwarded by her son, led to a trial. She was actually arrested, tried for lunacy. The jury was made up of 12 men, and she was found guilty as an insanity person. this letter that you see here is from R.J. Patterson, a medical doctor. He was the head of this sanitarium. And this letter is to Robert Todd Lincoln's attorneys who were working to proclaim the insanity of Mrs. Lincoln. Here's a copy of the letter. Here you can see the signature of R.J. Patterson, M.D., and gentlemen. And then this letter goes on to explain the emotional difficulties of Mrs. Lincoln. This is Mary Lincoln's room in this sanitarium that has become a historic site, the Bellevue Sanitarium. She contended Robert did it in order to preserve the family income. There was a good deal of money built up by Abraham Lincoln, and that was one of the charges that Robert was using, as she was frivolously spending and giving away the family fortune. And so this may well have been her contention that he was doing this to preserve the family income, may have well been the truth. She wrote a letter to her doctor, Willis Danforth, contends her insanity was due to a prescription she'd been given for chloral hydrate. It's a sedative, relaxes feelings of anxiety, which we know she was having, and it helped her with her insomnia, would aid in her sleeping. Here's a bottle that contained chloral hydrate, common prescription in her day. And this is a close-up of the label on the bottle. It says it's chloral hydrate, says it twice, tells you what the dosage is, etc. She was released after 4 months from the institution. She was there from the 20th of May, 1875 until the 10th of September in 1875. And she sent a letter to her son, Robert, a letter that contained a great deal of anger, expressed her sense of betrayal. She asked for a return of objects that he had collected and taken. Here's the portion of the letter. Send me all I have written for. You have tried your game of robbery long enough. You have injured yourself, not me, by your wicked conduct. Politics. Let's take a look at what's known as Lincoln's Lyceum speech. Young Man's Lyceum, it's in Springfield, Illinois. And this was a speech that he did in 1838 as a young man, 29 years old. And this Young Men's Lyceum met at the Baptist Church, pictured here, in Springfield, Illinois. And the title of the lecture or speech that Lincoln delivered was The Perpetuation of Our Political Institutions. And we're going to take a look at the major points. Our generation may not preserve our current form of government. And this photo of preserved goods, the only image I could find that dealt with preservation. So at any rate, number one, he's very negative about the generation that he's in and about the loss of democracy. Might sound familiar. The second item, problems will arise from within the United States. A foreign power will not be the cause of our loss. So all of this worldwide is not what's going to cause difficulties in the United States. It's people within the United States that will cause those excuse me, problems. Item number 3, a growing lawlessness in the United States. He talked about the hanging of a man in St. Louis, Missouri, Francis McIntosh, and he was a free black man, and how even free blacks were hung, not just slave blacks who had misperformed or tried to escape or something. He also discussed the murder of Elijah Lovejoy, who was a journalist in Alton, Illinois. So this was a place near where Lincoln was located. And in the newspaper, Lovejoy's newspaper, he talked about his support for the abolition of slavery. And he was killed by a pro-slavery mob. So growing lawlessness in the United States was a concern of Lincoln's in this speech. There's number 4 is there's a general public practice of ignoring the law. Laws are not being enforced. Some of them are bad laws, and we should be rid of them. They aren't good laws. But the good laws are also being ignored, according to Lincoln. And 5th, he stated that his young audience, who he was speaking to, need uphold the government created by a previous generation. So he's talking about the need for people to come forward and support the government, the democracy, that he is contending that we are losing. This is a picture, drawing of Lincoln making this speech in Springfield at the Baptist church there. Just to review, the speech talked about the preservation of government, which is in decline according to Lincoln, and how the U.S. will destroy itself. Destruction will not come from outside, and how there is lawlessness. There are good laws, there are bad laws. The good ones aren't being enforced, and the bad ones shouldn't be. And number 4, good laws are ignored. And finally, the young people in this audience, Lincoln himself was 29, you must uphold the government. And this is Lincoln's Lyceum speech. Again, the Lyceum being a group of young men formed together who would invite people to speak to them or have discussion groups among themselves. Political party membership for Lincoln. He joined the Whig Party. There was no Republican Party yet. And he became a leader in the Springfield area of the Whig Party. Over time, this Whig Party crumbled, and Lincoln would change allegiance. Whig Party was reinvented. There is a Whig Party today in our current times. Here's one here, the Florida Whig Party, acta non verba, which means action, not talking. And here's one in Michigan, Modern Whig Party. Their symbol is a wise owl. Thomas Nast was a political cartoonist in the latter part of the 1800s, and he's the guy that invented the symbols for the Republican and the Democratic Party. The Republican Party was symbolized by an elephant. and still is. Elephants, according to Thomas Nast, had very good memories and could think properly. And then he assigned the jackass to the Democrats because they didn't know what they were doing. So anyway, here is a rebirth of the Whig Party in Florida and Michigan. And notice here, established 2006. So that is just, it's not yet 20 years old. Originally established in 1833, as you can see here. So the Whig Party of the 1800s began to crumble. It was falling apart like a dry cookie. The Republican Party was then founded kind of to replace it in Ripon, Wisconsin. And you can visit this place in Wisconsin, this building on the left here. And you can see where it's located here. This red dot is Ripon, Wisconsin. It's a goodly distance from the Twin Cities, but can be easily visited by car. Again, excuse me. So the Republican Party was founded in 1854 in this small town, and Lincoln joined it in 1856 when it was just 2 years old, and when they ran their first presidential candidate. Politics in Illinois for Lincoln, political offices. Now, he's a Whig, but he runs for a seat in the Illinois General Assembly. So this is a state legislature. And he champions 4 major issues. Excuse me, I'll take a drink. Thanks. He wanted to improve shipping on the Sangamon River. He had run previously with 17 candidates. We talked about this last week. Only 4 could be elected to the Illinois legislature. Lincoln placed 8th, so he was not elected. But his major issue was the Sangamon River that he lived on, and he wanted it to be built up for better navigation. So he's arguing again for his local area, canals to be built and rivers to be joined together, and especially along the Sangamon River, but he was talking about the whole state of Illinois at the time. Voting rights for males who did not own property. You know, when the United States was founded, it was felt that yeah, the only people that really would care about voting or about the future of the country would be males who owned property. They had something to protect. So males who did not own property were not allowed to vote. Today, we're hearing some of the same thing. People without children. What interest do they have in the future of the United States? Old people. They know that they're going to die soon. What interest do they have in the future of the United States? So here's a case of Lincoln coming forward and saying males who do not own property should be allowed to vote. He was not supporting female voting, which of course would not occur for about another 80 years in 1920. So here's the picture posted here shows on the left a gentleman who owns property, and here is members of his family. He has a wagon, and he owns animals and So that's a person of substance who has an interest in the future of the United States. Lincoln also argued that he wanted free soil states, that is, states that did not have slavery. Now, like people in New York, okay, it was a free state, but there were people there who owned slaves. So Lincoln's saying, we need these properties to be free of slaves, states without slavery. He did not support at the time the abolition of slavery. What he wanted was, if one state enters the Union and it's going to be a slave state, then you need to have another state that also enters the Union that is a free state. This would maintain a balance of power. So, for instance, here in 1819, when Lincoln was just 10 years old, there were 11 free states in blue and 11 slave states. So Lincoln wanted to maintain a balance of one slave state comes into the Union, then one free state must be allowed in also. And that did indeed become the practice. Send free slaves back to Africa. A nation was created, Liberia, in West Africa, where many slaves were captured from that area and then brought to the North and South America. And in 1822, the nation of Liberia was founded for this purpose, a place to send freed slaves back to. Capital city is Monrovia, which is named for President James Monroe. The American Colonization Society was founded in 1816, and they founded this nation of Liberia in 1822. They were not disbanded until the civil rights movement of the 20th century, disbanded in 1964. So there were people from 1816 until 1964, a very popular society that was still proclaiming send blacks back to Africa. And here's a close-up of whoop, whoop. There we go. Sorry. Here's Monrovia, the capital. Here's the nation of Liberia. The official language for the nation of Liberia today is English. And you can see that it's on this west coast of Africa. So here are the four major issues that Lincoln was championing as he was running for political office in the state of Illinois. Improve shipping on Illinois rivers, especially the Sangamon River, which would benefit people in his territory. Non-property owners get to vote. You don't have to own a chunk of property to vote. Males only had to be over 21 years of age also. That's been changed to 18. The property ownership has been eliminated, and males are not the only gender that can vote. Item 3, free states need to equal slave states, 1 for 1. Item 4, freed slaves should be sent back to Africa. And there was 160-year-old effort that stayed in place, advocating this movement back to Africa. Lincoln served 4 terms in the Illinois legislature from 1834 to 1862. 1842, I'm sorry, 8 years. So he was elected in 34, 36, 38, and 40, 4 terms. National politics, political office, now 4 terms in the Illinois legislature. Now he starts eyeing national office. United States House of Representatives, he won the election in 1846, served 1 term there, 1847 to 1849, as a member of the Whig Party. 8 major items about his years in the House of Representatives at the United States level was served on the Post Office and Post Roads Committee. So post roads were built by the post office in order to move mail between towns and cities, especially small towns and cities. Here's an example of such a roadway, and here's a sign from the Boston, Massachusetts area declaring that they have 65 miles outside of Boston that is a post road where post offices have the right of way. They were built in order to deliver mail. So this is quite a big deal to be able to get letters to people in a speedy fashion. The interstate highway system that was begun in the 1950s was basically military in nature. Military has the right of way on all U.S. Interstate roadways. Every 5th mile had to be a straight line so you could land planes on it, etc. So here in Lincoln's day, it was to get mail delivered that got roads built. Second item, he served on a committee for the expenditures in the War Department. So this was military in nature. It was called the War Department then, not the Defense Department. After World War II, we changed the name of the Secretary of War and the War Department. Sounds aggressive. Changed it to Secretary of Defense and the Defense Department, which sounds like we're just protecting ourselves. Third item, he introduced a bill to abolish slavery, but only in the national capital of Washington, D.C. And it included a proposition to pay slave owners in Washington, D.C. for their losses and to continue to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act. Fugitive Slave Act required that anyone knowing about an escaped slave must do everything in their power in order to see to it that that slave is returned. So people in the North, if you were harboring, to your knowledge, an escaped slave, you were a criminal. So Lincoln wanted slavery abolished within the national capital, and again, reimburse slave owners for their losses and enforce the law that says you cannot protect escaped slaves. He also opposed the Mexican-American War, which was from 1845 to 1848. Blamed the war on the president pictured here, James K. Polk. Polk was looking for personal aggrandizement. That's all he was interested in, according to Lincoln. And boy, if you can have a war when you're president, you'll be remembered. And fifth, the Wilmot Proviso. I taught with a guy whose last name was Wilmot, and he's descended from this gentleman. So this is the Wilmot Proviso, David Wilmot, the man that introduced it. It was a bill proposed in Congress. It outlawed slavery in all United States territories. Sorry, my phone's ringing here, but outlawing slavery in all territories that had been gained from Mexico. And Lincoln supported this. It failed in Congress, however, so the Wilmot Proviso outlawing slavery in Mexican territories that the U.S. had taken never became a law. Wilmot Proviso, let's take a look here. Here's the United States at the time of this war, 1845 to 1848. Florida is a territory. Arkansas is a territory. This Michigan territory includes part of Minnesota and all of Wisconsin and Michigan. This is an unorganized territory. All these states in here hadn't been named yet. Oregon territory, and look how it goes up into Canada. Eventually, we got a law passed that established this as the northern border of the U.S. So this land was returned to Canada. But Mexican territory, look at that. Huge, gigantic portion of the United States was gained from Mexico in 1848. Eight major items in this treaty of 1845. Lots of territory here. 55% of what had been Mexico was taken over by the United States. The treaty that ended the War of 1845 saw the United States paying Mexico $15 million. Now, 15 million in 1848 is the equivalent of 600 million in 2024. And that 600 million is about 2.6 hours of the US military budget in 2024 also. Item 6, the justification for the war. Mexico had attacked our troops along the border, especially protecting Texas. Lincoln demanded to know where and when did these attacks take place. If that's the justification for the war, we have a right to know where were we attacked. It was never told. The Polk administration never released any information about that. Lincoln spoke against the president going to war, Polk going to war. He said the job of Congress was to declare war. It's a constitutional prerogative and what's interesting about Lincoln's objection to that war is, as of 2024, the United States has declared no war since 1941. Over 80 years ago. Here's Franklin Roosevelt speaking to Congress in 1941 to declare war on Japan, the last time a president made such an address. Here are the undeclared wars since 1941 in the United States. 23 wars, 83 years. That's one war every 3.6 years. Korean War, Bay of Pigs, Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam, Falklands, Lebanon, Grenada, Panama, First Gulf War, Somalia, Bosnia, Haiti, the Second Congo War, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Second Gulf War, Iraq War, Darfur, Libya, Syrian, war with the ISIL, and Ukraine and Gaza wars, where we are giving financial support only so far. So that's quite a chunk of the Constitution that's just been ignored for 3 generations. Item 8. Lincoln quits the United States Congress in 1948, and he supports the Republican candidate for the presidency that year, that should be the Whig candidate, Zachary Taylor. In exchange, Zachary Taylor promises Lincoln a federal appointment. Lincoln's appointed the governor of Oregon Territory. Here it is. It's everything that's in blue here is the Oregon Territory. Today it includes part of Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. Not what he was hoping for, not what he was expecting. He refused the appointment. He said, it's way too far off. It's on the other side of the continent, and it's an area that's controlled by Democrats, and he'd lose his Illinois law license for being out of the state for that extended period. So no, thank you. I'm wondering, could we quit here even if we don't have enough questions? Let's start
That would be
let's
fine.
start dealing with questions, and
Okay.
let me get out of this. Are we okay now like this? Great, thanks.
Okay. So, couple things, and I'm sure we'll get more as we discuss. There's a Logan Avenue in South Minneapolis, and the participants wondering if it's named after the Mr. Logan you mentioned in this program.
Oh, well, I have no idea.
I have a
But,
slight.
I used to do a lecture on all the presidential streets in North Minneapolis. And they are all the presidents in order.
So,
Washington, Jefferson. I was once going to meet a former student with another teacher. And he said he was visiting his mother from out east. And the guy that was driving said to me, "Boy, I wonder how far Buchanan Street is." And I said, "It's 16 blocks." And they said, "How do you know that?" And I said, "Because he was the 16th president or the 15th president. And we are a 1 block from Washington Avenue. So it's 16 blocks to Buchanan." Anyway, the presidents, that street I know, those streets I know about, but no, I would suspect that the Logan that is located in that area is probably named for a real estate developer.
actually, it's not. I looked this up.
Oh,
We were at it. And I just put in chat, I put a link. It's armitage.org, and it's Minneapolis streets from A to Z or Aldrich to Zenith. So you can look things up, and it actually is Civil War related. It
oh,
is. Um, Logan Avenue is named for John A. Logan, a Civil War general from Jackson County, Illinois. Served with William Tecumseh Sherman on his march to the sea, and also served as a U.S. House of Representative and in the U.S. Senate. And at one point, he was the Republican vice presidential candidate.
oh, interesting. And what's interesting about that is Minnesota was developing.
Mhm.
We'd become a state in the 1850s. Now it's the 1860s and streets are being named after Civil War people. So
Yep.
yeah. Huh,
So I found that kind of interesting. I thought I'll do a little research on that
thanks. Yeah.
while we're waiting. But I thought you might happen to know.
I,
And that website is a great website if you want to find out why streets are named what they're named in Minneapolis.
there's an excellent book on street names, and it's set in the city of St. Paul, and it was written by a Minnesota Historical Society person. I can't recall his name or the name of the book, but it's available. So,
Okay. A question about freed slaves. Um, they're wondering, were they required to move to Liberia? What was that optional? Was it just a voluntary thing? Or
well, the group that started all of this, let's get the slaves back to Africa, would
Mhm.
collect money and pay for their board back on a ship to Africa. And that's how Liberia was founded. I do not know the number of black freed slaves that were sent back to Liberia, um, but it was a minority of slaves. And of course, even after slavery was abolished, the movement continued to get all blacks out of the U.S. You know.
okay. Someone's wondering, did the Lincoln family have household help?
Oh, I don't know, but I would say absolutely they did. Yes.
So,
Um, I would think that they had maids, cooks, the whole thing. I mean, they were super wealthy.
so okay. During Teddy Roosevelt's presidency, didn't the position of the Democratic and Republican parties switch in terms of the positions that they held, the beliefs?
Yeah, I've talked about Lincoln being a big supporter of corporations,
Yeah.
and it was Teddy Roosevelt then, 40 years, 35 years later, who uh, stated that we need to start controlling these corporations. And he got all sorts of legislation passed. There was a beginning for this with Sherman, the Sherman Antitrust Act in the 1890s. And that Sherman Antitrust Act was the brother of General Sherman who got that passed. So there was a movement within the Republican Party to start controlling businesses before Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt really made it a huge effort on his part and got lots of laws passed that started to control businesses. One of them was wanting tax on personal income, especially at that really included much higher rates on people of wealth and no tax paying on people making below a certain amount of money. And so it was not only an effort to control corporations, but also to tax the wealth. The richest people in the history of the world today, there are still several from the 1890s because their wealth had gone untaxed. And although there are those who argue that the wealthy don't pay a tax today either. I mean, they have gotten so many deductions passed that they're able to deduct tremendous amounts of money that end up meaning they're actually paying less in taxes than someone who's making $40,000 a year. Warren, ah, I can't think of his name, one of the super wealthy guys.
Warren Buffett?
Warren Buffett, thanks. Warren Buffett has been opposed to all of this stuff. He thinks the wealthy need to be paying more than they are. And he talked about how his secretary paid a larger tax than he did. So, so anyway, this was, yeah, uh, Teddy Roosevelt was the super giant guy that started controlling, even though there'd been some starts earlier, he really brought it to the fore.
Hmm. Okay, a couple of clarifying type things. It's like,
Good.
um, someone came up with the name of the book about St. Paul streets. The Street Where You Live, A Guide to the Place Names of St. Paul. That was published in 2006 by Donald Epson. And
Yeah,
I will include a link of that and to the Minneapolis street names when I send out next week's link. I can
yeah,
include that in there for people.
great.
And let's see. I always had, oh, someone's like going, I always had an impression that Lincoln was a poor country lawyer with humble beginnings. Where did that impression come from if, in fact, they were very wealthy and able to afford household
Yeah.
help?
Actually, I'm going to talk about that later.
Later?
And
Okay.
but I want to add a little bit to it here. The whole rags to riches idea came after Lincoln. Uh, it was a book written about a young boy who advances from poverty to great wealth. And the whole rags to riches stories became attached to the opportunities you have economically in the United States. And presidents would run on that theme that, hey, I started out poor, and Herbert Hoover was one. There were, I mean, it went well beyond the 1868 publication of the first rags to riches story. Presidents still, on occasion, we hear that argument that, so, and we'll talk more about that in the next couple of weeks.
Okay. Also, would you say that the reasons why things were not declared wars, the list that you had of all of the conflicts, um, they didn't go to Congress because those were like the Korean War was a police action, wasn't it not? Um, they were things they're involved because of their NATO or UN alliances versus um, they're sending troops there in support, but not necessarily in war. When you say there's skirmishes, conflicts, all of the other things so that they don't have to go to Congress.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, we changed the name of something and call it a police action. I'm sorry, it's a war, as far as I'm concerned.
Hmm.
But, at the same time, with nuclear weapons becoming uh, far more common, the argument that's been used is the president doesn't have time to go to Congress. That can take, I mean, it could take a couple of weeks before you get approval for a war. And you have to respond to these things far more rapidly than you did when the Constitution was written or than in the past. And uh, so that's a major reason that's used for allowing the president the ability to declare war on his own, if that's what we want to call it, the president declaring war on his own. And, my belief is it's I understand that, but it's still, fine. Let's amend the Constitution then,
So,
you know.
what platform or issues did the Whig Party run on?
Um, hmm,
Or
I've
you
well, amazingly, I've had it was a lot of what the Republican Party picked up.
Mhm,
Um, but I've had a lecture on that, but just sitting here, I can't really recall. The Democrats were far more conservative in this period of time, and
okay,
they were founded at the beginning of the nation. I mean, it's the party of Jefferson and so on. And uh, the when the Republican Party came about, of course, they were anti-slavery. The Democrats had been very slavery oriented, and the conservative nature of the Republican Party, they picked that up after the Democrats went more liberal. So there's been a major change in the philosophies of each of these parties
mhm,
over the 170 years the Republicans have existed and the 240 years that the Democrats have existed. Um, yeah, but I cannot, uh, the Whigs were considered, uh, they were pretty conservative also, as were the Democrats. So,
okay.
yeah,
Um, Somebody's wondering, do you have a website?
I do not. And, I should have done that decades ago. And I could be posting stuff in there and people could visit it. And I don't know. I need to talk to somebody. I think it's time to do that.
Okay, because somebody's just wondering if they can get a copy of the slides. And
Oh, you can write to me and I'll send them to you.
okay,
But they are uh, very large, you know.
files.
Now, I send all of these slides to our IT person, Grayson Simmons, and I have to send it in 3 emails. So you can write to me, and today's lecture I can send to you, but it will be 3 emails, each one about 18 megabytes. Right.
Okay,
So yes, that can be done.
so I will include JB's email address
Okay,
along with the other two links, like the name of the book for the St. Paul streets and the Minneapolis streets. I'll include that all in next week's email.
great.
Um, some ones just quickly saying Whigs supported internal improvements, encouragement of business, and split on slavery. So maybe something to look at would be what ended up making the Whigs politically irrelevant.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
which might be something we can address in the future here because we are coming up on 2 o'clock. We are really happy that we had so many great questions today and the lecture, lots of interesting things came up. So we just want to thank you, JB, for sharing your time. Thank Grayson Simmons, who's our OLLI tech support person, for making sure everything was running smoothly. And we thank all of you for joining us here today. And we thank OLLI and the Ramsey County Libraries for their support. So just want to say thank you, everyone, and we will see about getting up on the OLLI YouTube channel and the library website for you to watch. Thanks.